Hi, this is Brian Salyer going over the reflection portion of my leadership interview. So, question number one, my top three lessons learned from this leader interview. Again, this is an interview done with Sean Salyer, who is over the distribution center at at Bass Pro Shops. So, I think the most shocking takeaway that I had from it was the prevalence of AI in his industry. This is something that we talked about at pretty good length on the record, but we also talked about it after the recording stopped as well, of just how effective AI is in his industry. I think on the recording he cites how it could take weeks to do something that an AI can figure out in a few seconds. I guess as a student, and especially as a student in a discipline that is very against AI, it was sort of shocking to me to find out just how beneficial it can be in this industry. Um, Second to that, and sort of my second takeaway, is that they are not doing a lot of skill-based training at Bass Pro Shops. They are hiring a lot of outside talent to handle their sort of AI and software innovations. It's something that we talked about a good bit in this class is the benefits of skill-based training and sort of improving on these skills with your current employees. And that just doesn't seem to be a strategy that they're taking. It seems like they are hiring a lot of outside talent to do this. Um, and I just kind of found that very interesting how AI and AI programming is becoming a discipline in and of itself that recruiters are looking for outside of college. I think that's interesting as I think in the past 4 years of my education has really been the boom of AI, right? Probably only 3 years ago did ChatGPT really sort of revolutionize the field and AI became, just an arms race. So I find it interesting that they are recruiting specific AI talent when realistically, you're not going to have hardly anybody right now that spent 4 years and went to college specifically to learn about AI, chat programs, stuff like that. Obviously, AI has been around for years, but this specific generation of generative AI is still rather new. So I find it interesting that kind of hunt to find that talent. And then my third takeaway, separate from the AI conversation, was actually this greater conversation about the modern employee and what the modern employee desires from their company. I think maybe it's a subject of just the communication era, right, where everybody can sort of talk constantly and show each other what their lives and their work is like. But I was really interested in the fact that he talks about this new sort of age of employee that has certain demands of their company, much more so than an employee might have had when he was in leadership 10 years ago. Again, I could see that sort of boiling down to everybody's connection to everybody else and seeing what these other companies are doing, seeing the inner workings of their own company, and a lot of maybe moral qualifications that the employee wants their company to meet. I find all of that really interesting about this sort of new type of employee that really wants to be recruited by their company rather than apply and work for a certain company. As for this next question, how did my understanding of diversity change after this interview? Um, we really didn't get into many diversity questions, but specifically to address diversity in terms of life experience, that is something that we talked a lot about. Diversity in his employees and the sort of unique challenges that they have. Especially in his area of the country in Macon, Georgia, you have a very diverse population with a lot of Black Americans as well as Hispanic Americans, a lot of low income families, as well as a really high tax bracket that is sort of running that company and that distribution plant. who are more from like the Atlanta area, and coming in. So there is a lot of diversity in that workspace, and I think this is what he's talking about when he's getting into um, sort of the challenges in mitigating these different employees and their internal conflicts, as well as their conflicts with the work that they're doing. And how a lot of his job is mitigating those sort of conflicts due to background or social differences, economic differences, beliefs in what the company should be doing and their values in the company. A little bit of union difference there. There is sort of it's not a unionized company, but there is certainly a movement there. So all of that is sort of playing into a larger diversity in that workforce and how he is spending most of his time, um, sort of sort of playing a moderator there, right? And that's specifically addressing sort of diversity and solving problems, where a lot of his employees have their own opinions on how they should be solving, they, as in the company, should be solving the problems that they're facing, and how these sort of more um, uh, frontline workers are willing to speak up and provide those opinions on how this company should be solving a problem on the higher end, right? So a lot of difference in perspectives, a lot of difference in backgrounds and things like that. And so all of that sort of plays into his job, and which is again just sort of acting as a mediator for all that. Um, I found that very interesting. That's not really a an aspect to leadership that I really thought about. Not in the business world, right? I thought of that, certainly for leadership in a political sense, but not necessarily leadership of like a distribution center. How much of his day is spent sort of mitigating that diversity, especially diversity of opinion. And that sort of plays into this next question. How did my understanding of leadership or management change after this interview? I think my main takeaway was just sort of the rapid pace of change in the management at the management level, dealing with a growing technology boom, a new type of employee, a new type of company, and in his position as this sort of middle management person, dealing with a company that is detached from its workforce, who wants to adapt to this new era with a workforce that has different opinions, and how his job is really just to bridge that gap. I found that very interesting, and it's sort of an interesting position to find yourself in, where you are not really in the position, you're in a position of leadership of sort of the front line, and not necessarily in a position of leadership to make these broad policy changes organization wide, right? He said Bass Pro Shops, he would put him as more of a mid-tier organization, not gigantic, but certainly rather big. So I think being on the lower end of management and leadership in that kind of an organization can be rather tricky. And that's really not something that I've thought about, or really considered, that specific level of management and what that work might look like, right? It's always either at the bottom tier or at the top tier, but it's that middle level is really its own job in and of itself. So yeah, that was sort of my reflection on that interview. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks.